A telescope in Thailand recorded something that should no longer exist. 3 distinct tails stretching in different directions long after the moment they were meant to fade. You didn't arrive here by chance, traveller. The cosmos has a way of guiding attention toward unfinished questions. What if the rules we trust are only local truths? What are the odds that an interstellar object already past perihelion would grow sharper instead of quieter? This comet is 17 days beyond the sun's closest grip. Its anti-tail should be dissolving into memory. Instead, it is tightening, brightening, holding its shape against every known force. A fragment from another star drifts onward, refusing to follow the script. Stay with me. Let's drift through the silence together. For centuries, comets have been among the most reliable storytellers of the night sky. They return again and again, tracing familiar arcs through darkness, responding predictably to gravity, radiation, and time. Astronomers have learned to trust these patterns. Solar photons push dust outward. Charged particles are carried away by the solar wind. As distance from the sun increases, activity subsides. Structure softens, light disperses. The universe resumes its quiet balance. Occasionally, perspective creates a brief illusion. When Earth passes through the plane of a comet's orbit, a thin spike of dust may appear to point sunward. This anti-tail is not defiance but geometry. Larger particles linger closer to the orbital plane, while lighter grains have already drifted away. For a short time, alignment makes delay look like direction. Then the illusion fades. Entropy resumes its work gently without urgency. This behaviour has been observed so often that it forms a baseline of expectation. After perihelion, when solar heating peaks and begins to decline, comets settle. Outgassing decreases, dust spreads. By the 3rd week, most fine structures dissolve into faint suggestions detectable only through patience and careful processing. This is not assumption. It is pattern recognition shaped by centuries of observation. 3 Atlas did not disrupt this pattern loudly. It simply declined to follow it. 17 days after its closest approach to the sun, the sunward structure associated with 3I Atlas was not fading. It was narrowing. Images taken weeks apart did not show diffusion or loss. They showed coherence. The edges appeared sharper. The brightness remained steady. There was no dramatic flare, no sudden outburst, only persistence. In physical systems, persistence requires explanation. Dust particles disperse unless guided. Velocities spread unless constrained. A narrow structure should soften with time unless some process continues to shape it. When a feature resists dispersion without obvious force, it invites careful thought rather than immediate conclusion. The questions that arise are quiet ones. What size distribution of particles could linger this long? What release pattern could remain narrow after weeks of exposure to radiation and gravity? And what mechanism could sustain alignment when natural forces work steadily to erase it? These are not questions of alarm. They belong to long nights beneath observatory domes, to scientists rechecking calibrations and timestamps. The observations were not isolated. Telescopes across different continents recorded the same geometry, different skies, different instruments, the same structure. Independent confirmation followed without spectacle. Veteran observers used restrained language. Unexpected, extended, unusual. These are not words chosen lightly by those accustomed to cometary variation. For the listener, this moment does not demand disbelief. It invites pause. It asks for attention to a quiet deviation, rather than a dramatic rupture. Science often advances not through shock, but through gentle resistance to expectation. To understand why this matters, it helps to return to fundamentals. A comet is not a solid body alone. It is an interaction. Ice approaches warmth, gas escapes, dust follows. A luminous cloud forms shaped by radiation, gravity, and motion. From this exchange emerge familiar paths, one narrow and ionized, guided by magnetic fields, one curved and dusty, shaped by photon pressure. Both move away from the sun, always. The apparent 3rd structure does not violate physics. It bends perspective. Yet perspective alone cannot sharpen with time. Geometry may explain appearance, but not persistence. As days passed after perihelion, expectation leaned toward quieting. Distance increased, heating declined, activity should have softened. Instead, the structure held its form, not dramatically, simply enough to be noticed. This does not suggest error, it suggests information. Comets are ancient, but they are not uniform. Each carries a record of its formation environment, temperature histories, chemical balances, structural memories frozen into ice. 3 Atlas did not form within the solar system. Its hyperbolic path confirms that. It arrived from a region shaped by another star under conditions unfamiliar to our models. Difference in this context is not threat. It is data. Tonight the universe whispers again, not with answers, but with an invitation to refine understanding. Patterns guide inquiry, but they are not immutable laws. They are maps drawn from experience adjusted when new terrain appears. It is acceptable to pause at the edge of certainty. Not knowing is not failure. It is the beginning of attention. For now there is nothing to resolve, only to observe, to accept that some truths reveal themselves slowly in silence. The stars remain steady, and the night allows us to rest within their unanswered light. To understand why persistence matters, we must slow our thinking to the pace of celestial mechanics. In space, nothing rushes. Every motion is negotiated between forces so gentle they act only because time allows them to. Gravity curves paths. Photons press softly. Charged particles listen to magnetic fields carried outward by the sun. Over days and weeks, these small influences accumulate, shaping what we see. A comet's tails are not decorations, they are records of interaction. The ion tail forms when ultraviolet radiation strips electrons from escaping gas. Those charged particles are caught immediately by the solar wind drawn into narrow streams that always point away from the sun. Direction is not a choice, it is imposed. The dust tail behaves differently. Dust grains feel the sun not as a magnetic presence but as light. Each photon carries momentum. Alone, the push is negligible. In number, it becomes decisive. Dust drifts outward more slowly, tracing a gentle curve that reflects the comet's orbit and its history of release. Broad, soft, predictable. The anti-tail, however, is not a third mechanism. It is a matter of alignment. Large dust particles, heavier and less responsive to radiation pressure, linger near the orbital plane. When Earth crosses that plane, perspective compresses a thin disk of debris into a narrow line. From our viewpoint, delay looks like defiance. But it is only geometry. Normally, geometry passes quickly. As Earth moves on, the alignment loosens. The disk reveals itself again as a spread of particles. Edges blur, brightness fades. Without ongoing shaping, structure dissolves. Entropy does not need urgency. It only needs time. This is why the persistence observed in 3I Atlas draws attention. Not because it is spectacular, but because it resists softening. The line remains narrow. The brightness does not fall as expected. Weeks after perihelion, when dispersion should dominate, the structure remains organized. Organization in physics is costly. It requires constraint. One explanation is mass. If the comet released an unusually large population of heavy particles, dispersion would be slower. Larger grains drift less readily. They respond weakly to radiation pressure. In sufficient quantity, they could remain visible longer than typical debris. This idea stays close to known behavior. Some comets are dust-rich. Variation exists, yet mass alone struggles to explain sharpness. Even heavy particles possess slightly different velocities. Over time, those differences spread them apart. A thickening beam would be expected. Soft edges, gradual loss of coherence. The images do not show that. Another explanation considers fragmentation. If the nucleus shed icy fragments, each could act as a temporary source of material. Multiple small contributors might maintain apparent structure. Comets have fragmented before. History offers examples, but fragmentation leaves signatures. Multiple brightness centers, irregularity, evolution toward chaos as fragments separate. The observed nucleus remains compact. The structure remains smooth. Order persists where disorder would be expected. A third possibility invokes directed jets. Localized vents on a comet's surface can produce focused streams of gas and dust. Such jets have been observed directly. They can be narrow, they can be sustained, but comets rotate. Rotation smears jets into fans unless conditions are exceptional. A vent aligned near a rotation axis combined with unusually slow spin could preserve direction. This is not impossible, but it requires coincidence layered upon coincidence. None of these explanations fail outright. None fully satisfy. Each explains persistence or sharpness, but not both without assistance from circumstance. In science, such moments are familiar. They signal not contradiction, but boundary. The place where existing models thin, where assumptions derived from limited samples begin to strain. Here, the interstellar origin of THAILAND Atlas becomes relevant. Comets formed within our solar system share a common heritage. Their chemistry reflects the solar nebula that birthed planets and debris alike. Water ice dominates. Carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide appear in measured proportions. Dust grains show familiar mineral signatures. THAILAND Atlas did not form here. Its trajectory confirms it was shaped under another star, in a disk with different temperatures, different pressures, different histories of radiation. Its internal inventory may include volatile ices that sublimate at lower temperatures. Carbon monoxide, for instance, activates far from the Sun and persists longer after perihelion. Sustained activity becomes plausible. Sustained activity, however, does not guarantee structure. Outgassing feeds material into space, but without direction it produces clouds, not beams. The question remains what maintains alignment. This is where reflection replaces urgency. The absence of an immediate answer is not an invitation to leap. It is a signal to wait for better measurement. Velocity matters. Particles accelerated by sublimation reach modest speeds. Radiation pressure alters trajectories gradually. If measurements reveal velocities beyond those ranges, new processes must be considered. If they do not, existing explanations narrow. For now, the data remains incomplete. Images show form, not motion. Brightness implies density, not mechanism. Patience becomes part of the method. The listener may feel the tension of unanswered questions, but tension is not the goal. Awareness is. Science advances by holding uncertainty without rushing to dissolve it. You're not lost in space, you are part of it. And part of understanding the universe is accepting that clarity arrives slowly like dawn. Tonight the universe whispers again. Not with solutions, but with restraint. It reminds us that mystery does not demand fear. It invites attention. It is all right to not know. The stars continue their motion. The dust continues its drift. And somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient still moves, carrying information we have not yet learned how to read. Rest with that thought. Silence is the language of distant worlds. Time is the quiet collaborator in every astronomical observation. Nothing in the sky reveals itself all at once. Light arrives late. Motion is inferred through repetition. Meaning emerges only when change is measured against expectation. In this way, comets are not events but processes unfolding slowly enough that understanding requires restraint rather than reaction. When astronomers speak of timelines, they are not describing drama, they are describing decay. After perihelion energy input decreases predictably, ice retreats back into solidity, gas production falls, dust no longer receives fresh momentum. These are not assumptions but consequences of thermodynamics written into every icy body that has passed near the sun and then moved away. This is why the calendar matters as much as the image. A structure visible one day after perihelion means little. A structure visible 1 week later invites curiosity. A structure that remains coherent nearly 3 weeks later becomes information. Not alarm, not proclamation, but data that resists being averaged away. Astronomy often advances through this resistance. When behaviour persists beyond expectation, it suggests either an overlooked mechanism or an untested context. Neither is a failure. Both are opportunities to refine how knowledge is framed. The universe does not correct itself to fit models. Models learn slowly to listen. Across November, observations of THAILAND Atlas accumulated quietly. Each image added a point on a curve that should have been descending. Instead, the line flattened. In some measures, it gently rose. This was not obvious in isolation. Only when dates were placed side by side did the deviation become clear. Pattern recognition requires patience. Brightness in astronomical terms is never just light. It implies particle density, size, composition, and geometry. A tail that does not dim suggests either replenishment or resistance to dispersion. Both possibilities are constrained by physics. Neither allows indefinite coherence without explanation. Yet explanation need not be immediate to be valid. Here restraint becomes essential. Science does not benefit from rushing to closure. It benefits from allowing uncertainty to remain structured. Hypotheses are held lightly compared against incoming data and adjusted without attachment. This process is slow because it must be. For the listener, this slowness can feel unfamiliar. Much of modern life moves toward instant resolution. But the cosmos operates on different terms. It offers information gradually filtered through distance and noise. To study it is to accept delay as part of understanding. Measurement in this context becomes the bridge between wonder and clarity. Spectroscopy will reveal velocities. Photometry will track change. Imaging over time will show whether coherence holds or dissolves. Each method asks a specific question and listens for a specific answer. None claims completeness alone. The upcoming close approach of 3i Atlas does not promise revelation. It promises resolution of constraints. Distance affects signal strength. Proximity sharpens measurement. What was ambiguous becomes bounded. Some explanations will narrow, others will fall away. This is how knowledge advances, not through surprise, but through subtraction. Interstellar origin adds context without demanding conclusion. Objects formed elsewhere carry unfamiliar histories. Their materials respond differently to familiar forces. This does not make them mysterious in a dramatic sense. It makes them informative. Each deviation from expectation refines the space of what is possible. The study of such objects marks a quiet transition in astronomy. For most of history, observation was confined to what belonged to this system. Now visitors arrive carrying records from elsewhere. Not messages, not intentions, but chemistry shaped under other suns. Interstellar objects are not interruptions. They are additions. 3 Atlas does not need to be extraordinary to be valuable. Its persistence alone is enough to challenge assumptions built on limited samples. With only a few such visitors studied in detail, every data point matters disproportionately. This is not significance imposed by narrative but by scarcity. As future surveys begin to detect more interstellar bodies, context will expand. Patterns will emerge. Outliers will be recognized as categories or dismissed as noise. Until then, each object is both singular and provisional. Meaning remains flexible. There is comfort in this incompleteness. It reminds us that understanding is not a state but a process, one that unfolds alongside observation never fully finished. The universe does not hurry us. It allows time for thought. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient still moves following laws older than language. Its path intersects our instruments briefly, leaving traces that require patience to interpret. Nothing more is demanded. Tonight, the universe whispers again, not with urgency but with continuity. It invites attention without insisting on conclusion. It allows the mind to rest inside uncertainty without fear. It is enough to observe, it is enough to wait, and it is enough to let the stars keep their silence. The work of understanding often happens far from the moment of discovery. It unfolds in the quiet hours after the images are captured, when light has already travelled its long distance and settled into data. Astronomers return to these traces, slowly comparing nights, aligning frames, subtracting background noise. What remains after subtraction is not spectacle, but structure, and structure is where meaning begins to gather. In the case of 3i Atlas, structure persists where softness was expected. This persistence does not announce itself. It simply refuses to fade on schedule. Each additional night of observation adds weight to that refusal, not because it surprises, but because it remains consistent. Consistency in science is more revealing than novelty. It suggests that what is seen is not a fluctuation, but a behaviour. Behaviour invites classification. To classify, one must compare. The history of cometary observation offers many examples of complexity, yet nearly all resolve towards simplicity with time. Fragmentation leads to chaos, then dispersal. Outbursts produce brilliance, then quiet. Even the most dramatic comets eventually yield to entropy. They do not maintain sharpness without cost. Cost in physical systems must be paid by energy, by confinement, or by circumstance. If energy continues to flow, activity can persist. If confinement exists, dispersion can be delayed. If circumstance aligns briefly, appearance may deceive. Each possibility carries implications that can be tested not immediately, but deliberately. Here the discipline of astronomy shows its patience. No single image is trusted alone. Each must be anchored to time, to calibration, to independent confirmation. Only then does confidence grow. The Thailand observations matter not because of geography, but because they extend the record. They offer another angle, another night, another confirmation that the structure holds. The Earth's motion adds its own rhythm to the analysis. As our vantage point shifts, perspective should change. Anti-tail geometry should weaken as alignment passes, yet the coherence remains visible across changing angles. This persistence reduces the likelihood of coincidence. Geometry alone struggles to account for duration. Still, science resists conclusion until measurement tightens the bounds. Velocity remains the key, unknown. Motion distinguishes between passive debris and active release. It separates memory from process. Without velocity, images remain suggestive but incomplete, like still frames taken from a longer story. Spectroscopy will provide that missing dimension. Light stretched or compressed by motion carries its own quiet testimony. Shifts measured in fractions of a nanometer translate into speeds that either fit or resist expectation. The method is precise, but interpretation remains cautious. Even unexpected values do not immediately demand radical explanation. They demand verification. In this waiting period, reflection becomes part of the narrative. The universe does not reveal itself all at once. It allows layers to be peeled back slowly, often revealing that the most interesting truths live between certainty and ignorance. To sit in that space requires humility. For the traveller listening in the dark, this humility can feel calming. There is no demand to decide what 3 Atlas is or is not. There is only the invitation to observe alongside those who measure carefully aware of how often certainty has misled in the past. Interstellar objects deepen this humility. They remind us that our models are provincial, shaped by what formed here. When something arrives from elsewhere, it carries histories that our assumptions may not fully capture. Difference then is not failure of theory, but expansion of context. Each new data point does not close the question, it sharpens it. The universe becomes more specific as knowledge grows, not more dramatic. Precision replaces speculation. Mystery narrows into insight, though it never disappears entirely. This is the quiet beauty of science practiced with care. It does not chase astonishment. It cultivates understanding. It allows wonder to coexist with doubt, neither overpowering the other. In this balance, meaning feels stable rather than urgent. As days pass, the comet continues along its path indifferent to interpretation. It neither knows nor responds to curiosity. It simply follows the forces acting upon it, writing those forces into light and dust. The record is there for those willing to read slowly. There is comfort in knowing that not every question must be answered tonight. Some answers arrive only when distance changes, when instruments improve, when patience accumulates. Until then, silence is not absence. It is preparation. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient still moves, carrying its quiet testimony through space. We receive only fragments of that story shaped by time and limitation. That is enough. It is all right to not know. The stars remain steady, and the night holds its calm. The closer the comet moves toward its moment of closest approach, the more the act of observation resembles listening rather than looking. Instruments gather photons, but meaning arrives through patience. Each night adds a quiet layer to the record, not changing the question, only refining its edges. What matters now is not surprise, but continuity. Distance shapes everything we know. When an object draws nearer, resolution improves signal, strengthens uncertainty, tightens. This does not transform mystery into certainty, but it reduces the space in which explanations must live. Possibilities narrow, assumptions are tested gently without spectacle. This is the calm discipline of astronomy at work. As December approaches, attention shifts from images alone to motion and change. Brightness curves are traced. Subtle fluctuations are watched for rhythm. Regularity might suggest rotation. Irregularity might suggest bursts. Absence of variation carries meaning too. Stillness can be as informative as motion. Light once captured is divided into its components. Spectra stretch across detectors, each line a signature of substance and speed. Small shifts speak quietly but precisely. They reveal how fast particles move, how they are pushed, how they respond to energy. These measurements do not dramatize, they clarify. If velocities remain modest, consistent with sublimation and radiation pressure, the picture settles gently into known physics. Exotic composition becomes the leading explanation. An interstellar body rich in volatile ices, uncommon here, sustaining activity longer than expected. The persistence becomes a lesson in diversity rather than defiance. If velocities exceed those bounds, the lesson deepens. New mechanisms would need consideration not as sensational departures, but as refinements of how matter behaves under unfamiliar conditions. Even then, restraint remains essential. Nature often surprises without violating its own rules. Our understanding is what evolves. In this moment before answers arrive, the space between questions and resolution carries its own quiet value. Science is often portrayed as a sequence of discoveries, but its true character lives in these intervals. Times when knowledge is incomplete yet carefully framed. Times when curiosity rests rather than accelerates. For the listener awake beneath the slow turning of the night, the interval can feel peaceful. There is no demand to resolve the mystery immediately. There is only the sense of being present while understanding forms. This presence is not passive, it is attentive. Interstellar objects invite this attentiveness more than most. They are brief visitors passing through without intention, offering only what their motion and composition reveal. They do not arrive to be decoded fully. They arrive to expand context. Each one widens the map of what exists. The coming observations will not exhaust that expansion. Even once explanations converge, questions will remain. How common are such objects? How varied are their compositions? How many behaviours lie beyond the narrow range defined by our own system? These questions do not rush toward closure. They open outward. Future surveys will answer some of them. With more visitors, patterns will emerge. What seems singular now may later feel typical. Or it may remain rare, a reminder that diversity includes extremes. Either outcome strengthens understanding, neither diminishes wonder. The universe does not simplify itself for convenience. It offers complexity without apology. Our role is not to tame it, but to learn how to describe it accurately, gently, and without haste. This requires patience as much as intelligence. As 3i Atlas continues its passage, it becomes part of a growing archive. Its data will be compared, revisited, reinterpreted as models improve. Long after it fades from view, its traces will remain informing future encounters with other wanderers. This continuity is comforting. It means that no observation is wasted. Even unanswered questions contribute by defining where knowledge once paused. Silence in this sense is not emptiness. It is a marker of careful thought. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient still moves, unaffected by our curiosity yet quietly shaping it. Its journey intersects ours only briefly, leaving behind measurements that invite reflection more than certainty. Tonight the universe whispers again, not to demand belief, but to encourage listening. Not to insist on resolution, but to remind us that understanding unfolds in time. It is enough to remain attentive, it is enough to wait, and it is enough to let the cosmos continue exactly as it is. As the observation window widens, the meaning of the comet begins to separate from the urgency of explanation. What remains is not a puzzle demanding resolution, but a record asking to be understood at its own pace. The data accumulates quietly night after night, turning motion into memory. In this phase, astronomy becomes less about discovery and more about stewardship. the careful holding of information until it can speak clearly. Every measurement carries uncertainty. This is not a weakness, but a feature of honest science. Error bars are not admissions of ignorance. They are boundaries of humility. They remind us that knowledge lives between precision and limitation, shaped by instruments that must interpret light that has already travelled across vast distance and time. What we know of 3I Atlas is filtered through this reality. As the comet moves farther from the sun, expectations lean towards simplicity. Activity should decrease, structures should soften, dust should spread. These expectations are not arbitrary. They arise from long observation of how matter behaves under diminishing energy. Entropy does not announce itself loudly. It simply persists. And yet when persistence itself persists, it becomes something worth noting. The strength of the observation lies not in any single night, but in continuity across many. A week of coherence could be coincidence. 2 weeks invite analysis. 3 weeks suggest behaviour. Behaviour implies cause, even if that cause remains unidentified. Science does not demand immediate answers. It demands consistency. In this sense, the comet becomes a quiet teacher. It does not disrupt our understanding so much as lean gently against it, revealing where assumptions rest too comfortably. It shows how easily models built from familiar examples can begin to thin when faced with a visitor formed elsewhere. Interstellar objects occupy a special place in astronomy because they are not products of local history. They carry no obligation to conform to the chemical or structural norms of the system. Their behaviour reflects environments we cannot observe directly. They are messengers only in the sense that they are samples, not signals. This distinction matters. It keeps interpretation grounded. Nothing about 3I Atlas suggests intention. Nothing demands narrative beyond physics. What it offers instead is variation, and variation is the raw material of understanding. Without it, models stagnate. As data continues to be collected, attention shifts subtly from what the comet is doing to how we respond to what it does. Are we quick to label anomaly as exception, or are we willing to let categories expand? Are we attentive to quiet patterns, or do we wait for spectacle? These questions are as much about method as they are about objects. The history of astronomy is filled with moments where restraint proved more valuable than reaction. Neptune was predicted before it was seen. Stellar evolution was modelled long before life cycles were observed directly. Patience allowed coherence to emerge. The same patience applies here. Spectroscopic results, when they arrive, will narrow possibilities. They will not eliminate mystery, but they will define it. Velocities will either align with known forces or hint at additional influences. Composition will either resemble familiar mixtures or extend the range of known materials. In both cases, understanding grows by refinement rather than replacement. It is tempting to frame such moments as thresholds, but science rarely crosses lines cleanly. It shifts weight gradually from one explanation to another. Confidence increases not through revelation, but through accumulation. Meanwhile, the comet continues its indifferent passage. It does not respond to observation. It does not change course to accommodate curiosity. It follows gravity, radiation, momentum, and nothing more. In this indifference lies its value. It offers a natural experiment unconcerned with interpretation. For those who follow such phenomena closely, there is comfort in this neutrality. It reminds us that the universe does not perform. It exists. Observation is an act of alignment, not control. As nights lengthen and data sets thicken, a calm acceptance settles over the investigation. Whatever explanation emerges will not diminish the quiet beauty of what has already been seen. The persistence itself has already done its work. It has slowed attention. It has invited care. This slowing is central to the silent cosmos approach, not because the universe is silent, but because its most meaningful signals are subtle. They arrive below the threshold of urgency. They require listening without expectation. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient still moves. Not toward us, not away from us, but through its own trajectory shaped long before our instruments were built. We catch only a fragment of that movement, enough to remind us that understanding is always partial. There is no loss in this. Partial understanding is still understanding. It grounds us in process rather than conclusion. It keeps curiosity open rather than closed. As future surveys detect more interstellar objects, this moment will gain context. Patterns will replace singularity. Behaviors will be grouped, compared, explained. 3i Atlas will become one example. Among many, its peculiarities either echoed or contrasted by others yet unseen. That future does not diminish the present observation. It enriches it. Until then, the investigation remains suspended between knowledge and wonder. This suspension is not tension. It is balance. It allows reflection to accompany measurement. Tonight the universe whispers again, not with answers, but with continuity. It reminds us that inquiry does not need urgency to be meaningful. It needs patience, care, and the willingness to let silence remain where silence belongs. It is all right to rest within that space. It is all right to let questions remain open. The cosmos remembers even when we are still learning how to listen. The longer the comet remains under observation, the more its presence shifts from anomaly to companion. Not in familiarity, but in rhythm. Night after night, instruments return to the same coordinates. The sky rotates, the background stars slide past, and the comet, quiet and persistent, continues to write its thin signature into the darkness. This repetition carries a strange calm. What once felt uncertain now feels steady. There is a moment in every long investigation when urgency dissolves. The questions remain, but they no longer press forward. They settle into place, waiting for the next layer of evidence. At that point, the act of watching becomes contemplative. Astronomy slows into something closer to listening and attention sustained without demand. 3. Atlas now occupies that space. Its behavior has been documented enough to be trusted, yet not enough to be fully explained. The balance is delicate. Too little data invites speculation. Too much invites complacency. Here the balance holds. What matters most is not whether the comet fits existing categories, but how those categories respond. Scientific models are not rigid structures. They are living frameworks adjusted incrementally as new information arrives. When an object resists easy placement, the response is not to force it in, but to examine the shape of the framework itself. This is how understanding deepens, not through disruption, but through adaptation. The anti-tail remains a lesson in perspective. It reminds us that what we see is shaped by where we stand. Alignment, distance, and motion conspire to create appearances that feel counterintuitive. In many cases, time resolves the illusion. In this case, time has not yet done so. That delay is informative. Delay allows space for method. It invites comparison rather than reaction. It turns curiosity into discipline. For the listener awake beneath the slow drift of thought, this discipline can feel grounding. There is comfort in knowing that not everything demands interpretation tonight. Some things simply require presence. Observation without conclusion is not incomplete. It is attentive. As the comet continues its outward journey, it carries its story away from us. But the record remains. Data does not vanish when the source fades. It settles into archives waiting to be re-examined with new tools, new questions, new context. This persistence mirrors the comet's own. Both leave traces that outlast their moment. Interstellar objects by their nature remind us of scale. They are small against the vastness of space, yet significant in what they represent. Each one is evidence that planetary systems are not isolated. Material travels, histories cross. The galaxy is not a collection of sealed rooms, but a shared environment with slow exchange. This realization does not arrive with drama. It arrives quietly through repeated confirmations, through orbits traced backward and forward, through chemistry measured line by line. It arrives the way most truths do, incrementally. The study of 3i Atlas participates in this larger shift. It is not a singular revelation, but a step in a longer movement toward understanding our place within a connected galaxy. The comet's peculiarities matter because they expand the range of what we expect to encounter, not because they defy comprehension. Expectation in science is always provisional. It exists to be tested, refined, sometimes abandoned, but abandonment is rare. More often, expectations stretch. They become more inclusive, more tolerant of variation. This stretching is progress. There is a quiet elegance in this process. It does not announce itself. It does not seek attention. It unfolds through careful comparison, through patience exercised over years rather than moments. In this way, astronomy mirrors the universe it studies. Both value time. As new instruments come online and surveys grow more sensitive, the context around 3i Atlas will change. It will no longer stand alone. Others will follow. Some will behave similarly. Some will not. Patterns will emerge, and with them clarity. Until then, this comet remains a reference point not because it is unresolved, but because it helped define where resolution was needed. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient still moves. Its path does not intersect our concerns. Yet for a brief interval, its passage aligns with our capacity to observe. That alignment is enough to teach us patience. The universe does not ask us to rush. It does not reward certainty over care. It offers information at a pace that encourages reflection. When we accept that pace, understanding feels less like conquest and more like companionship. Tonight the universe whispers again. Not to explain itself, but to remind us that inquiry can be gentle, that knowledge does not always arrive as an answer, but often as a deeper question held calmly over time. You're not lost in space. You are part of it, listening as it unfolds, and it is all right to rest within that unfolding, allowing silence to remain where it belongs. The record of observation eventually reaches a quiet saturation point where additional data no longer feels urgent but reassuring. Night after night, the same structures appear subtly altered gently, evolving, never dramatic. In this phase, certainty does not increase quickly, yet confidence grows. The behavior is real. The persistence is not an artifact. What remains is interpretation, and interpretation benefits from stillness. Astronomy often moves through this stage unnoticed by the outside world. There are no announcements, no turning points, only refinement. Measurements are repeated to confirm what is already suspected. Independent observers compare results. Minor discrepancies are resolved. The work becomes careful rather than curious. This is where science earns its calm authority. With 3i Atlas, the emphasis now rests on continuity. The comet's activity has not surged. It has not collapsed. It has simply continued. This steadiness matters more than any single dramatic feature. It suggests that the processes at work are stable, governed by underlying conditions rather than transient events. Stability invites a different kind of thinking. Instead of asking what caused a momentary anomaly, researchers begin asking what sustained environment allows such behavior to persist. Questions turn inward toward composition, structure, and history. Not what happened, but what this object is made of and how that makeup responds to energy over time. In this way, the comet becomes less of a mystery and more of a specimen, not in the sense of reduction, but of context. Its behavior is no longer isolated. It is placed alongside known processes, compared, constrained, and slowly understood. The unknown narrows not because it vanishes, but because its edges become clearer. Interstellar origin remains central to this framing. Objects formed elsewhere carry no obligation to resemble those formed here. Their volatile inventories, internal layering, and mechanical strength may differ in ways that subtly alter how they age under solar heating. Persistence may be ordinary within a broader cosmic distribution, even if it appears rare within our limited local sample. This perspective shifts attention away from singular explanations and toward population thinking. How many such objects exist? How often do they behave this way? What range of outcomes should we expect when material formed under different stars enters this environment? These are long questions answered slowly as more data arrives. The comet's continued motion away from the sun reinforces this calm. Activity declines gradually, not abruptly. Structures soften, but do not vanish. The expected trajectory resumes, though, with its own pacing. This does not invalidate earlier observations, it contextualizes them. The universe often allows phenomena to persist, just long enough to be noticed, then fade without ceremony. There is something instructive in that rhythm. It teaches restraint. It reminds us that not every deviation demands a dramatic cause. Some simply reflect diversity beyond our initial assumptions. Recognizing this difference is part of scientific maturity. As attention slowly shifts forward toward future surveys and broader samples, THAILAND settles into its role as a reference rather than a question mark. It will be cited, compared, revisited. Its data will inform models that describe not one comet but many. In time, its persistence may seem unremarkable, or it may remain a boundary case. Either outcome is useful. This gradual integration into knowledge carries its own quiet satisfaction. The process has worked as intended. Observation led to curiosity. Curiosity led to measurement. Measurement led to constraint. Constraint led to understanding, even if incomplete. Nothing was forced. Nothing was rushed. The universe offers no guarantees of closure. It offers continuity instead. Patterns repeat often enough to be learned, but rarely enough to remain interesting. The work of astronomy lives in this balance where wonder and rigor coexist without competing. As the comet recedes further, it leaves behind a subtle imprint on how we think. Not because it changed everything, but because it gently adjusted expectations. It reminded us that our models are provisional, shaped by experience, always open to refinement. That reminder is quiet but enduring. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient still moves, following a path indifferent to interpretation. Its brief visibility here has already served its purpose. It expanded context. It sharpened patience. It demonstrated that learning does not require resolution to be meaningful. Tonight the universe whispers again. Not with new data, but with perspective. It suggests that understanding is not a destination, but a way of paying attention over time. It is all right to let the record stand as it is. It is all right to accept what has been learned. And it is all right to rest, knowing the cosmos continues quietly whether we watch or not. As the comet drifts farther along its path, the attention it once demanded begins to soften into something quieter and more enduring. What remains is not the urgency of Anomaly, but the afterimage of careful watching. The sky has returned to its familiar stillness, yet the memory of persistence lingers folded gently into the broader fabric of understanding. In astronomy, this is often how meaning settles in, not with resolution, but with integration. The long arc of observation teaches a particular kind of patience. Early images provoke questions, later measurements refine them. Eventually, the questions themselves change shape. They become less about explanation and more about implication. What does this behavior tell us about the diversity of matter beyond our system? How does it reshape the boundaries of expectation? These are not questions that ask to be answered quickly. They ask to be lived with. 3i Atlas now occupies this reflective space. Its triple-tailed appearance, once a focal point, becomes a reference. The persistence that challenged timelines becomes a data point one among many weighted but no longer isolated. The universe has not revealed a secret so much as demonstrated a range. And range in science is often more valuable than exception. When models are built from limited samples, they feel precise. When new samples arrive, precision gives way to breadth. This is not loss, it is maturation. The study of interstellar objects is still young, and youth is marked by sharp contrasts. Over time, those contrasts soften as context grows. What seems extraordinary today may feel expected tomorrow, not because it was misunderstood, but because understanding expanded around it. There is a quiet dignity in this process. It resists spectacle, it favours accumulation. Each observation, each analysis, each careful restraint adds a layer. None of them claim finality. Together, they create a landscape in which knowledge can move freely without being forced into narrow channels. The comet's behaviour reminds us that physics is not a script but a set of tendencies. Given certain conditions, matter behaves in certain ways. Change the conditions and the behaviour adjusts. Interstellar origin alters the initial state. Different temperatures, different chemistry, different histories of radiation and collision. When such material enters our system, it responds to familiar forces in unfamiliar combinations. The result is not defiance, but variation. Variation is the quiet engine of discovery. Without it, models stagnate. With it, understanding deepens. The persistence observed here becomes less a mystery to solve and more a signal to listen carefully to what the data is willing to say, and equally to what it is not yet ready to reveal. For the listener who has followed this arc, there is a subtle shift that occurs. Curiosity no longer feels sharp. It becomes rounded, contemplative. There is space to breathe between questions, space to accept that not knowing everything does not diminish what is known. In fact, it often clarifies it. Astronomy has always required this balance. The night sky offers abundance, but interpretation demands restraint. Instruments can collect immense volumes of information, yet meaning emerges only when patterns are allowed to form slowly. This slowness is not inefficiency. It is alignment with the scale of the phenomena being studied. As 3 Atlas recedes, it joins countless other objects that have passed through our view and moved on. Most were unremarkable. A few were instructive. Each contributed in its own quiet way to a collective understanding that is never complete but always growing. The value lies not in any single passage, but in the continuity of attention that makes comparison possible. Future surveys will bring more such visitors. Some will be faint, some will be bright. Some will behave predictably, others will not. The framework built now will help receive them with less surprise and more context. This is how science prepares itself, not by predicting every outcome, but by remaining flexible enough to incorporate the unexpected without breaking. The story of this comet does not end with a conclusion. It ends with placement. It finds its position within a broader narrative of interstellar exchange of matter, moving between stars of systems that are not closed but permeable. This perspective shifts how we think about our own system, not as an isolated island, but as part of a larger flow. There is something grounding in this realization. It situates curiosity within humility. We observe not because the universe demands interpretation, but because we seek connection. Each object observed becomes a small bridge between what is familiar and what is distant, between what is known and what remains open. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient still moves, carrying its history through space without regard for whether it will be noticed. For a brief moment, our instruments intersected its path. That intersection was enough. It offered a glimpse, a measure, a reason to pause and reflect. Tonight the universe whispers again, not to announce discovery, but to affirm continuity. It reminds us that knowledge does not arrive all at once. It accumulates, gently shaped by patience and care. There is peace in accepting that rhythm. It is all right to let this chapter settle without closure. It is all right to carry forward what has been learned. And it is all right to rest, knowing that the cosmos continues its quiet work whether we watch or not. There is a quiet moment that arrives after enough data has been gathered, after enough images have been processed, after enough arguments have been made and unmade. It is the moment when the noise fades, and what remains is not an answer, but a realization. 3i Atlas has carried us to that moment. Not because it proved anything extraordinary, but because it refused to behave in a way that allowed us to remain comfortable with what we thought we knew. Long after the headlines move on, long after the debates cool, what lingers is not the object itself, but the way it exposed the fragility of our certainty. For centuries, astronomy has been humanity's most humbling science. It taught us that Earth is not the centre, that the Sun is one star among billions, that our galaxy is one spiral among countless others. Each discovery has shrunk us a little more, and each time we adjusted, we learned to accept smallness as a kind of truth. But 3i Atlas challenges something subtler than scale. It challenges predictability. It asks whether our models describe the universe, or merely describe the parts of it that have already agreed to behave. What unsettles scientists about this object is not that it came from another star system. That was always expected. Interstellar space is not empty. Rocks are ejected during planetary formation. Debris drifts between stars. Visitors are inevitable. What unsettles them is timing geometry behavior alignment. Not any single anomaly, but the way the anomalies cluster, like fingerprints overlapping in places where no hand should have been. The human mind is uncomfortable with clustered improbability. We tolerate coincidence when it is isolated. One strange measurement can be dismissed. 2 can be debated. 3 can be argued away with selection bias. But when improbabilities begin to echo one another, when they form patterns instead of noise, we feel something deeper than curiosity. We feel exposure, as if the universe has briefly stopped speaking our language and revealed that it was never obligated to do so. 3. Atlas arrived on a path that brushed the architecture of our system with improbable intimacy. It moved in near alignment with the planetary plane, not screaming in from some random inclination, but sliding through the same flattened geometry, shaped by our sun's rotation. It passed near worlds that host our machines, our eyes, our listening posts. It brightened when it should have slept. It remained active when it should have quieted. It did not obey the emotional rhythm we have come to expect from comets, the arc from ignition to exhaustion. Instead, it lingered in tension. And then there was the silence. Not cosmic silence, which we understand, but institutional silence. The pause in images, the delay in releases, the careful language. Silence is not evidence of anything by itself, but it is a mirror. Into it we project fear, hope, distrust, wonder. Silence forces us to confront not what we know, but what we are prepared to believe. In that sense, 3. Atlas did not just test our instruments, it tested our relationship with uncertainty. There is a temptation when faced with the unknown to rush toward narrative, to frame the object as a messenger, a probe, a threat, a relic. These stories comfort us because they restore agency. If it is intentional, then someone is in control. If it is dangerous, then we know how to fear it. If it is artificial, then we know how to categorize it. But nature has always been most unsettling when it refuses to fit into any of our stories cleanly. Consider how many times in history humanity has mistaken unfamiliar physics for intention. Lightning was once a weapon. Disease was once punishment. Meteors were omens. Each time the truth was not less profound than the myth, only quieter. It required patience instead of prophecy. It required admitting ignorance instead of filling the gap with certainty. 3. Atlas sits at that same threshold. It does not ask us to believe in visitors. It asks us to consider how easily we confuse anomaly with meaning. Yet it would also be dishonest to pretend that everything about this object is easily absorbed into existing frameworks. Some measurements stretch models to their limits. Some behaviors require assumptions stacked precariously atop one another. And that tension is productive. Science advances not when anomalies disappear, but when they accumulate enough weight to force revision. The history of physics is a history of discomfort gradually resolved into deeper understanding. Not all discomfort leads to revolution, but all revolutions begin as discomfort. There is another layer to this story, one that rarely appears in papers or press releases. It is the psychological layer. For the first time, humanity is capable of noticing interstellar visitors as they pass through. Our telescopes are sensitive enough. Our surveys are wide enough. Our algorithms are fast enough. This means we are entering an era where the universe will interrupt us more often. Not with answers, but with questions. And each interruption will force us to practice humility at scale. 3i Atlas may turn out to be nothing more than an extreme example of natural behavior, a statistical outlier amplified by observation bias and incomplete data. Or it may reveal gaps in our understanding of cometary physics, interstellar chemistry, or galactic debris distribution. Or it may do something else entirely, something quieter still. It may remind us that certainty is not the default state of knowledge, but a temporary achievement earned through restraint. What matters in the end is not whether this object was artificial or natural. What matters is how we responded to not knowing. Did we listen carefully? Did we argue honestly? Did we resist the urge to collapse, ambiguity into spectacle? Or did we rush to fill silence with noise because silence makes us uneasy? There is a lesson here that extends far beyond astronomy. We live in a time where information arrives faster than understanding, where images circulate before context, where speculation outruns verification. 3i Atlas exposed that imbalance. It showed how quickly the human mind seeks resolution, and how rarely the universe provides it on demand. The cosmos does not rush, it drifts. It reveals itself slowly, often indifferently, and never on our schedule. As the object recedes, as it slips back into the dark from which it came, it leaves behind no final verdict. No announcement, no confirmation, only data that will be reanalyzed, models that will be adjusted, and questions that will quietly persist. This is not failure. This is the normal state of exploration. The absence of closure is not a flaw in science. It is its engine. Perhaps the most honest thing we can say about 3i Atlas is that it reminded us of how young we are as observers. We have only just begun to notice the traffic between stars. We have only just learned how to watch without projecting ourselves too aggressively onto what we see. The universe is vast, not just in space but in patience. We can afford to wait while we learn how to ask better questions. In the end, there is something deeply human about the way this story unfolded. We looked up. We noticed something strange. We disagreed. We speculated. We worried. We hoped. And then slowly we realized that the most important transformation was not happening in the sky but within our expectations. 3. The Atlas did not change the universe. It changed the conversation we're having with it. So we returned to silence not as ignorance but as posture. A readiness to observe without demanding immediate meaning. A willingness to let uncertainty exist without rushing to conquer it. Somewhere beyond the orbit of Mars, beyond the reach of our instruments, an object continues on its path indifferent to our debates. And here on a small world, a species learns once again that the cosmos does not owe us clarity, only opportunity. Listen carefully. Not for answers, but for the space between them. The final stage of any long observation is not conclusion, but quiet accommodation. By the time an object like 3i Atlas slips beyond the reach of detailed measurement, something subtle has already changed inside us. The questions remain, but they no longer press forward with urgency. They settle into the background, joining countless other open threads that science carries patiently without anxiety. This is not abandonment. It is maturity learned slowly through watching. There is a common belief that knowledge must end in certainty. In practice, much of our understanding rests on carefully managed uncertainty. Models are not built to erase doubt, but to shape it into something usable. They give form to ignorance defining boundaries within which curiosity can move without dissolving into speculation. 3. Atlas now exists inside those boundaries, neither explained away nor elevated beyond reason. As the comet fades, the data it offered becomes quieter as well. No longer new, no longer provocative, it enters a slower cycle of reanalysis. Measurements are checked again, assumptions are revisited, comparisons are drawn with future objects not yet discovered. Meaning in astronomy rarely arrives all at once. It accumulates gradually, layered across years, sometimes decades. For the listener who has followed this story, there is a gentle relief in this phase. The tension dissolves. The universe does not collapse into threat or revelation. It simply continues. Stars burn, dust drifts, gravity keeps time. Within that continuity, one object's brief strangeness becomes part of a wider harmony. There is something calming in realizing that the universe does not rush to explain itself. It allows us to notice, to wonder, to misunderstand, and to learn at our own pace. Silence here is not absence, it is generosity. It gives us room to grow without overwhelming us. The study of interstellar objects will continue. More will arrive. Some will pass unnoticed. Others will invite careful attention. Each will add texture to our understanding of how common, how varied and how subtle the material between stars truly is. 3. Atlas was not the first, and it will not be the last, but it arrived at a moment when we were finally ready to watch closely. That readiness matters. It marks a quiet transition in awareness. We are no longer only observers of our own system. We are becoming participants in a broader galactic conversation, carried not by intention but by matter itself, moving slowly through space. Every interstellar object is a sentence in that conversation, written in ice dust and motion. Some sentences are clear, others are ambiguous. Some are meant to be read more than once, with new understanding each time. 3. Atlas belongs to that last category. It will be returned to not because it demands answers, but because it rewards reflection. There is humility in accepting that not every mystery resolves within a single season or a single lifetime. Science does not promise completion. It promises continuity. The willingness to keep asking, to keep refining, to keep listening, even when the universe offers no reply. That willingness is its strength. Tonight the sky looks ordinary again. The comet is no longer the centre of attention. Telescopes move on to other targets. The background stars reclaim their stillness. Nothing has been lost. What was gained cannot be measured only in data or citations. It exists quietly in how we now hold uncertainty with less fear. You're not lost in space. You are part of it, learning how to watch without needing to control what you see. Silence is the language of distant worlds. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient still moves, carrying its history, without concern for interpretation. And here on a small world, a species learns once again to listen. It is all right to not know how this story ends. It is all right to let the silence remain. Sleep now, traveller. The universe will continue its work patiently while we rest. This closing moment is not an ending, but a settling of breath. Observation becomes memory, and memory becomes context. What once felt immediate now feels integrated. The comet has done what all good teachers do. It has stepped back and allowed understanding to continue without it. In the absence, there is no loss, only perspective widening gently. In years ahead, new data will arrive from other visitors crossing the dark. They will be compared against this one. Patterns will emerge or dissolve. Either outcome will be useful. Knowledge grows not by confirming expectations, but by surviving contact with what does not fit easily. 3. Atlas offered that contact quietly without demand. The cosmos has always spoken in long sentences. We are learning how to read them without rushing to punctuation. Patience becomes part of literacy. Attention becomes a form of respect. When we listen this way, discovery feels less like conquest and more like companionship unfolding slowly over time. Tonight the stars ask nothing of us. They continue as they always have, marking time through motion and light. We rest within that motion, briefly aware of how small and how connected we are. There will be other questions, other nights, other visitors. For now this is enough. The record is written, the silence remains, and understanding waits without urgency. Rest comes easily when curiosity releases its grip, not because answers arrived, but because asking was enough. The universe does not reward haste, it rewards patience. And that patience meaning gathers slowly like starlight travelling vast distance to reach a quiet mind, willing to receive it without demand or fear. This is how exploration ends, for now gently unfinished, open and calm, beneath a sky that keeps its ancient promises without explanation. Tonight, after the instruments fall silent and the sky returns to its familiar stillness, something remains that cannot be logged or archived. It is not an image, nor a measurement, nor a plotted curve. It is a shift in perspective, subtle and lasting, like the afterglow of starlight on closed eyes. 3. Atlas has already moved on, continuing its long passage through interstellar night, yet its presence lingers in the way we think about what it means to observe. In astronomy, distance is often treated as an obstacle, something to be overcome with larger mirrors and more patient detectors. But distance is also a teacher. It slows understanding. It stretches questions across weeks, months and years instead of minutes. It reminds us that truth in the cosmos rarely arrives suddenly. More often, it accumulates gently, shaped by repetition, calibration and quiet doubt. This is especially true for visitors from beyond our system. Interstellar objects do not belong to our narratives. They were not warmed by our sun nor assembled from the same disk of dust that gave rise to our planets. They carry histories written under different stars in different chemical balances across timescales we can only infer. When they pass through our telescopes, they offer not explanations but contrasts. 3 Atlas offered such a contrast. Its behaviour did not overturn physics, yet it pressed against the edges of expectation. It asked us to consider how narrow our experience has been limited by the familiar comets that grew in our own neighbourhood. Thousands of comets observed, and still they all emerge from one family. One visitor from elsewhere was enough to remind us that familiarity can masquerade as completeness. There is humility in recognising this. Not the humility of insignificance, but the humility of learners. We are not wrong about the universe. We're simply early in our understanding of it. Each new category of object expands the space in which our models must operate. Each anomaly becomes less a threat to authority and more an invitation to refine the map. For the listener awake in the quiet hours, this realization can feel grounding. The universe is not chaotic, but it is not obligated to match our expectations either. Order exists, but it is broader than our current charts. And there is peace in knowing that discovery does not always arrive as a revelation. Sometimes it arrives as an adjustment, a small correction that changes the whole angle of view. Think of the triple tail that refused to fade the geometry that should have relaxed the structure that seemed to hold its line. Whether the final explanation is a dust population heavier than usual, or a jet aligned with slow rotation, or a volatile inventory that keeps feeding the coma longer than we assumed, the deeper lesson is the same. Nature has more ways to be itself than our templates can predict. A single object can teach a laboratory of minds to pause. The future of interstellar studies will be shaped by this mindset. As detection becomes routine, surprise will give way to context. Objects like 3i Atlas will be compared, categorized, and eventually understood as part of a population rather than an exception. What feels rare now may later feel typical, not because the universe changed, but because our perspective widened enough to include it. This is how knowledge matures. It does not discard mystery, it integrates it. The unknown is not erased, only repositioned, moved from the center of attention to the horizon where it continues to guide curiosity without demanding immediate resolution. In that sense, uncertainty is not a flaw in science, but one of its engines. There is something deeply human about this process. We look outward not only to understand the heavens, but to understand ourselves within them. Every distant object we observe reflects something back to us about patience, about scale, about the limits of certainty. In this way, astronomy is as much an inward journey as an outward one, and the calm of it can be as nourishing as sleep. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient still moves. It does not know it was observed. It does not know it was debated in forums, measured in pixels, translated into numbers, and yet its brief appearance altered the course of thought here, on a small world orbiting an ordinary star. That quiet influence is enough. There was in those THAILAND frames a kind of disciplined beauty, 3 lines of material drawn by sunlight and wind, each obeying its own rule, yet appearing together in one quiet moment. The iron-tail traced magnetic fields like a thread pulled straight. The dust-tail curved with inertia, soft and patient. The anti-tail, that stubborn blade of a light, held its place when it should have blurred. If December brings spectra and velocities, it will not end the wonder. It will simply give it a sharper outline for thought and then let it drift on. Tonight, the universe does not demand interpretation. It does not ask us to solve it. It simply continues steady and immense, offering moments of clarity amid long stretches of silence. Silence is not emptiness. It is the medium through which distant worlds speak slowly in light and time. You are not lost in space, you are part of it. If this story found you tonight, you may stay for the next. For now, let the questions remain open and unforced. Let the data rest on the page. Let the sky keep its secrets without turning them into fear. It is all right to rest within that space. It is all right to not know. Sleep gently now, traveller. The cosmos remembers even when we do not. As this chapter drifts toward its quiet close, we find ourselves not with answers, but with something gentler. A sense that we have watched carefully, that we have listened. The images from THAILAND did not shout their meaning. They simply arrived, patient and precise, reminding us that the universe reveals itself on its own terms, never all at once. We now know what can be known for the moment. We have seen 3 distinct tails traced in light. We have measured persistence where fading was expected. We have compared notes across continents and instruments, and found agreement without certainty. And in that space between agreement and understanding, science does what it has always done. It waits. The mystery of 3 Atlas is not a failure of explanation. It is a reminder of scale, of time, of how small our window of observation truly is, and how remarkable it is that we are able to look at all. To observe is not to conquer. It is to participate briefly in something far older and far larger than ourselves. Tonight you have shared that participation, traveller. You have stood quietly beneath distant light watching matter from another star system pass through our own. That is no small thing. Wonder does not require resolution. It only asks for attention. The universe is still alive beyond this moment, still unfolding, still whispering in spectra and shadows we have not yet learned to read, and it will continue long after this story fades into memory. Rest well, stay curious. If this journey found you tonight, you may stay for the next. The universe will keep watch,